Okay, good evening. I'd like to welcome you. I'm Pat Luebke. I'm the Dean of the School of Professional Studies here at Alverno. And I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules, whether as educators or full-time people doing other work or students, to come and spend some time in engaging in a conversation about character education. And I would like to start by pointing out some things that are out on the table for you to become familiar with. There's a brochure about leadership, advancing character and culture in schools, which is a professional development program that I know some of you have participated in. It's offered here at Alverno, and if you'd like to learn more about it, this is part of the Wisconsin Character Education Project, and it's all over the state of Wisconsin. So if you'd like to learn more about it, there are brochures right outside. And there's also a one-sheeter from the Wisconsin Character Education Project about Promising Practices Awards. So you may want to take a look and see if there are things that are happening in your schools that may qualify you for a Promising Practice Award, and this tells you about it. If you're working on culture, if you're working on character, there's a number of things that might surprise you that fall in that realm that could help you get on a path to becoming a promising practice school and on down the road to a school of character and possibly a district of character. Right now we have one district of character in the area, and that's the South Milwaukee School District. There aren't any others, are there? Did I miss someone? I think it's just South Milwaukee, but there's a number of schools of character. In a little bit, I'm going to introduce you to some people who are going to fill us in on their experiences as part of a panel. But to start with, we have a couple of activities. And so for those of you who are sitting alone or perhaps with one or two people, if you could join others at another table so that there can be some conversation. And each of you should have a light salmon colored sheet on your table, and there are 3 prompts on that table. The first one is, what would the climate and culture in a school or a model school look like, sound like, and feel like? So if you're looking at the school of your dreams, the place that you really want to be, the place that you really want your children to go to school, what would that look like? We'll give you about 5 minutes to kind of talk about that a little bit and dream a little bit, and then we'll report out. The second prompt, then we'll go on to the second prompt, which is really think of your own setting, your own school, or for those of you who are students, perhaps your high school. Think back a few years to when you were in high school. And what's already happening that's contributing to a positive school climate or culture there? It'll give you a little bit of time to reflect back on your experience in a K-12 setting. And then the last one is what needs or challenges exist that you can identify that impact school culture. So we're going to start with the first prompt. What would that climate and culture in a model school look like for you? What would it sound like? What would it feel like? So if you could have a little bit of conversation, we'll be reporting out in a couple of minutes. We'll get a sense of what the people in the room are looking for. We have microphones on both sides, so would you please share what came up at your tables? Were there things that were in common, or did you all have really different, diverse thoughts on this? Who wants to start? Because if you don't, okay. Oh, we've got a volunteer. Woo! That must be a student.
Yeah.
How did I know that? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I am a junior here at Alverno. Our table talked about how it's important to bring different people's cultures into the classroom and how to celebrate them, and how it's important to just bring awareness about other people's histories and like celebrating holidays and things like that, and also the importance of passion in the classroom, because if you're not interested in the topic, then you're not going to participate and it's not going to be a good conversation. So those are like the top 2 things that we talked about.
Thank you. Who's next? Who wants to follow that leader of a student? Here we go. Not to be outdone. Oh,
Well,
we've got a table behind you, and then you're next.
I'm Katie. I'm also a student here in the nursing program. So just wanted to piggy off of Brianna's answer to that. So just from my own personal experience in being in high school, I had 4 years of philosophy. And so I think that it's important to ask those hard questions earlier on, both in middle school and high school, because I think a lot of issues that come up in early adulthood aren't being addressed until early adulthood. And with all the stress of classes, I think that a lot of students are graduating high school without really having an understanding of what they believe and having a solid perspective on how they see the world until after college. And so we can make a lot more progress towards social and global issues if we have a greater perspective of what we believe before coming into college. And so asking those hard questions and looking at those different beliefs and perspectives, I think is very important.
And you're suggesting that should be done in high school or
Yes.
middle school and middle school.
Earlier the better, as
The
long as they
earlier
can
the-
comprehend it.
Great, thank you. Okay, you guys were next. I'll give you mine.
Great, thanks. My name is Dave, and I'm a community volunteer. My experience is kind of limited, but I do some volunteering with the Greendale school system. So our group came up with a couple of keywords I just wanted to pass along. One of them is calm. We have a woman here who used to work in Madison school system, and she talked about fights breaking out in hallways and such. And so she sees the climate of calm being a really good thing. Another one mentioned collaboration at different levels. And then finally, students to be themselves, which kind of goes along with culture, I imagine, just allowing students to be.
Okay, do you guys want to talk while we're down here? Okay, you're next.
So we both work at an early childhood school in MPS, and so we kind of bring a little bit of a different perspective to this. We said that it looks like walking in a building, smiling, happy people, a lot of calm and maybe some colorful things on the walls, more of an aesthetic to it as well. And then we said it sounds like staff and students saying positive things to each other, uplifting each other. And then we said that it should feel positive, warm, and inviting because we are in a pretty tough neighborhood. And sometimes our students need that safe space to feel respected and not be put down or said negative things about or to. And so we really feel like in order for students at such young age to kind of believe in themselves and have this strong sense of climate and culture, that they need to be uplifted to do so.
Great, thank you. Okay, who's going to volunteer first on this side of the room?
Oh, come on my side. I'm not competing with Amy, but
We've got someone right here.
Okay, I'm Jody Schneider, and I teach at Woodland School. And we are a school of character, national and state. However, you have to live up to that. You have to constantly work at keeping it. And I see needs that we have now. Once you have that, you need to really ramp it up. And so that's why I'm here tonight. And we were talking about the climate, and I think I do sometimes see things through rose-colored glasses, and sometimes I see them through sunglasses. And I think lately it's been through sunglasses. I'm saying, we can improve on this. We can improve on that. And as I talked to people at the table, that they were saying too that the climate, when you walk in, we do have that climate. People feel welcomed and greeted, and staff and kids work well together for the most part. Yet, I had a hard day today. So this is it's a work in progress.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Eliana Shell. I am a substitute teacher at the Waukesha School District. And in this table, we were talking about the importance of establishing relationships with the students, with teachers, with the staffs in general, and with all the stakeholders for a good environment and good climate and culture at the schools.
Thank you. So now it's not a question of which table, it's a question of who at the table.
Hello, my name is Raina. I am a junior here at Alverno, and I major in early childhood education. So we talked about building relationships not only within like the students and the teachers, but also the families, getting the families involved. In the climate that really changes the school, building that special relationship with parents and kids can go a long way in a kid's education. So having that rapport back and forth with families and students can make the climate really positive and happy for the school, the teachers, and the families.
Thank you. So I think we've heard a couple of themes that have run across the idea of relationships, not just between adults and students, but also between people in school and families. More than once we heard the word calm, and I find that wonderful. I remember when I talk to students, we really talk about the fact that as adults, we have to be sure that we control our emotions at all times when we're around students. And sometimes they do things that press buttons, but it's really important that we remain calm. And sometimes that's not always easy to do. And then the notes on positivity and working together. So there's some themes that we're beginning to hear. Okay, time to go. You have 5 minutes to do prompt number 2. Conversations. But it seems to me that there's a lot of interplay between questions 1 and 2. So did you discuss, as you were discussing question 2, did things come up that you had not already covered in the first question?
Oh, okay. Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Bonnie, and I'm an Alverno alumni. I've done 4 programs here, including a master's and advanced licensure for administration. I worked in public school. I'm a retired middle school teacher for Milwaukee Public Schools. And for me, I know as far as the response from the first question, you heard a pattern of the term calm. For me as a teacher, it wasn't uncommon to drive to the school and see memorials of people who had passed or violently killed on corners. It wasn't uncommon for me either to look outside my classroom window and see a memorial right on the corner across the street from the school. So you can imagine how the students' young hearts and souls might have, respond to that. My concern was, would they become, sort of not real empathetical, but sort of, I can't think of the word that I want to say, but for me, the first word would be that I didn't see a lot of was empathy, as an educator in the school. And then to watch the children having to be subjected to these memorials on their way to school. And so for me, I think the lack of empathy, the lack of maybe compassion, we needed to see more of that perhaps in our school communities. You're welcome.
Someone over here had her hand up.
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm a senior here at Alverno, and our table really discussed going back to specifically about this school, the small class sizes, and how that allows you to do so many other things. And we began talking about choice, and that kind of motivates students because each student is such an individual in themselves that they're going to have their own passions, they're going to have their own motivations, and you have to treat them as an individual. And typically we focus this in high school. You have a set curriculum, and you're probably not going to be that motivated or passionate about a lot of the things that you learn. And so that kind of brought us into a choice between, I think you said you had a choice between reading or something else, and you would always choose the reading because that's what you liked more. And, we brought up here at Alverno how we don't have grades, and we can, instead of just passing a test and forgetting about it, we have to do application. And, we have to write the papers or do the presentations and do the projects, and that allows us to actually learn and express what we learn and put in our own individual twist on it too.
Thank you. Anybody else in looking at questions 1 and 2 have anything to add from those 2 areas? No? I know you've all been working all day. Well, let's take 5 more minutes then and go on to question 3, which is, oh, this should be different. Yeah, you should have some for this. What needs or challenges can you identify that are impacting school cultures today? And you still only have 5 minutes.
You have a list started already?
You can,
Amazing director of college transition. Like, I would say she's probably the best in the country. She's amazing. And she has a team that she, has had to teach, obviously, but she's just so knowledgeable.
okay, we need to come together one last time before we start the panel. Who would like to share about some of the challenges that they're seeing? Yes. Okay. Oh,
Okay.
we got one. And then over here, okay.
So I know I touched on parent involvement earlier, but getting parents involved, that can be a really hard challenge, especially in inner city schools where parents don't know how to get involved. So getting them involved is really important. And we also talked about so much. Making sure that it's like stability in like the upper ed part, like with administrators and different directors, making sure that stays very consistent, because it can become confusing for parents as in the students as well, keeping up with like different regulations and rules and things like that. And yeah.
That's a really good point. Isn't it interesting how sometimes it's easier to talk about challenges than it is to talk about what's going right? Who else would like to share?
Hi. I'm Emily. Is it working now? Yes. Okay. Hi. I teach at a Catholic school, and we continued our discussion at the table of empathy. And I shared how this year we're really focusing on character education and how our students can spout off everything there is to know about religion, but then they go to recess and they're fighting and they're not living out that piece. And so the lack of empathy and how do we change how they interact with one another. They're respectful to adults, but not to peers. So we touched on that at our table.
Thank you. How about, are there others? Yes.
What the young lady said. Hi, I just would like to add to what the young lady said about the importance of bridging the communication with home and school. And it does work both ways. As an educational institution, we have to do a better job, and I say that in the spirit of teachers, educators, whatever role you may have in the school, we have to do a better job at reaching out to families. And then we have to, in the process of doing that, we have to offer some information as to how families can navigate through the system so that families are also feeling comfortable enough to reach out to their teachers or to the various educators. I also hear, as I listen to the various speakers, I also hear two frameworks sort of working here, and it's not my role to do that. I'm sure you'll go into that, but that's an Alverno thing, That's an Alverno. But what I hear there's different languages being spoke from the perspective of an educator, and I think I heard it over here at this table. And the other, there's another framework being, it seems, being presented here from the framework of how do we best bridge or gel that sense of community, which is what character education is about, is being able to mold and bring together that sense of community, whether it's coming from families to schools or vice versa, or how we as educators reach out to families, and how we hold our colleagues accountable to do the same thing so that there's some consistency.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anyone else want to get something in? Yes.
My name is Carmen Jackson. I teach 5th grade at Capital West Academy. And I think one of the difficulties that we see, or I should speak for myself, that I see is students getting mixed messages. We have, one of our core values is self-control. We also have a core value of responsibility, but from all different places, whether it's media or even their own families, where they're not getting that same message. Sometimes at home self-control is not necessary. Sometimes you don't have to be responsible because you have a parent who will make sure everything is laid out for you, and you go pack your book bag for you, and so if it doesn't get in there, my mom didn't put it in there. So that's, I think, one of the challenges we face is the kids are getting mixed messages from all different places, and then we kind of come in at school to teach these core values. It's confusing for them.
Thank you. Actually, another one also is between teachers as well with students. There are times in my classes when I was teaching, and I would say to students, how would you take it if your students in your class approached me in the way you just approached me? And it's kind of like, take a step back. It's like, oh, not a good idea. I said, right, make sure you think of it that way. And so it really is, I think people talked about different frameworks, about different perspectives, and I think that's really important. Thanks for sharing that. Well, I think it's time now. And actually we are only 13 minutes behind schedule, which is not too bad, to bring our distinguished panel up to the podium. And we're going to have a conversation with these folks about their experiences and going to look at the myths, the challenges, and the opportunities for teacher education, character education in 2018. So give us just a minute to get set. Okay, now we're going to move into the second stage. I'd like to start by just doing a brief introduction of our four panelists so you can put a name and face together, although my guess is you can probably do that from their pictures in the program. But Nancy Athanasiou to my left is our undergraduate program director in teacher education here at Alverno. Next to her is Dr. Mora Anderson, who is the principal or the executive director of Capital West Academy. So go ahead, shout out. Yes. To her left is Kathleen Dimmer, who is a band and general music teacher in the school district of Brown Deer. And Brown Deer has been very involved in character education for a while, as has the Carmen School Network, represented by Bevin Christie on the end. So in preparation for this session, I was doing a little bit of reading. Character education sometimes can be one of those terms that people understand differently. So, it's like inclusion. If you're an educator and people talk about inclusion, a lot of times people go, ugh. And it's because people bring their own biases, their own definitions to a term, and that can be positive or negative. And character education is one of those terms. So I did a little looking, given the fact that the first part of our title is the myths about character education, and I identified one person's thoughts about what the myths in character education are. And I'm going to share those with you and just kind of see if you've seen any of that in your experience, or if there are other myths about character education based upon the experiences that you've had. This person identifies that one of the myths is that people believe that fostering socio-emotional competence and character development is really not the role of the school, that should happen at home. Other people believe that it's competitive with the true purpose of schooling, which is to learn academics, which feeds into the third myth, and that's given the current pressure for higher academic achievement, schools cannot afford to add character education to an already crowded curriculum. There are others who say that by the time children get to school, their personalities and core values are already formed and you can't do anything about them. And the last one is really the only thing that matters is what I do in my classroom. So those are one person's thoughts about 5 myths around character education. And I would open it up to the panel to see, does that coincide with any thinking or experiences that you've had, or are there other myths that you've experienced? Someone? Okay, we're not going to have any trouble with getting people to volunteer.
I feel like you just like triggered me 5 times. We have an advisory program at Carmen, and we have 5 campuses. So we have 2 middle schools and 3 high schools. We've always had an advisory program since we opened, and we don't have guidance counselors. So it's really the role of the advisor to know those 15 to 20 students. And so they're the point of contact for other teachers, for parents, for people like me that are working with the career readiness programming. And so one of the biggest pushbacks that we hear is around that advisor role. They didn't come to be a teacher to be also an advisor. And so for us, like we completely switched from parent-teacher conferences to parent-advisor conferences, so which are this week. But you have a 30-minute meeting with your student and the parent, and you give a 360 view of academics, behavior, any challenges, but also learning about the student and their family. And empathy came up quite a bit in your small conversations. And I think that when we were actually here for our kickoff in August we have over 200 employees now. We started with like 13. So we had a student panel, and several of the students said, we don't want your sympathy, we want your empathy. And so I think that sometimes there's a perspective of coming in and fixing these kids, and they don't need to be fixed. They need to be supported. So I think when you're saying like it's either not our job or there's no room in the curriculum or we can't afford it, you can't afford not to. They're not going to learn if you don't build those relationships. That's totally foundational. And if you can earn their respect, you'll get respect. And whether they like math or not, they're going to at least attempt to learn in your class.
I'll step in at that point because we are focusing on assets-based thinking rather than deficit-based thinking. So when you're talking about helping individuals understand that our kids and families don't need fixing, but we need to figure out the gems that are automatically embedded in the strengths that they bring with them to the setting. We've been working with Integrative Comprehensive Systems. That's a program through UW-Madison, and it really helps individuals, especially those who are in charge of the education of our young, to realize and recognize their own biases. And it's okay not to know, but it is not okay not to seek. So when you realize that, because let's be honest, we don't know what we don't know until we realize we don't know it. But once that becomes knowledgeable to you, it is your duty to prepare yourself to best help your children recognize their own strength and draw that out. One of the things that I always tell the staff that I work with, we can't pick and choose our children. They come to us. And part of that assets-based thinking is figuring out, we call it the funds of knowledge. What are the hidden gems, those strengths that, let's take a student who talks all the time and possibly wants to be the class clown. Well, how can we flip that around? How can we have them earn the stage by participating and cooperating at times that are most important for everyone's learning experience, and then helping them build that interaction and help get individuals on their side. So we have to really think about, what do we say about ourselves when we reject the strength of whatever family, the urban family, the suburban family, whatever the case might be. What do we say about ourselves when we reject people? So I am on the mindset of the Character Education Partnership. It is our dual responsibility to teach both academics as well as moral action and or character.
Yeah, and coming from the public school as a teacher, looking at it from a different viewpoint, the myth where it's saying something, well, that's not my job, we don't have time for that. My administrators worked really hard to carve out time in the schedule. So every day for 25 minutes, that chance to build the relationships that we're saying are so important, it's there. And you're assigned a teacher, and you're with that teacher for 4 years. That's that same person who's going to be with you every day, and that gives that opportunity to build the relationship. But once we made that happen, our data shows, we have less referrals, there's less suspensions, our student achievement goes up. So that just goes to show. But if the administration is willing to carve out that time and make it happen, that's really important on the teacher's end, because there's only so much we can do in our classrooms. So that's been really helpful and important.
They've all said it. I know, and I agree with Bevin. It's like, you read those, and I was like, for each one of them. But I just came back from the National Character Education Conference a few weeks ago, and I've heard this before, and we've said it here. Character education isn't one more thing that you add to the plate. Character education is the plate. And it's for all the reasons you've just suggested. It's because, with that in place, and as you're working on that, you are working on the asset space with the kids. You are working on relationship building. And with that, the academics do come, and the scores do increase, and all of the research shows that. So, the fact that, it's taking time away from, no.
If I can add one other thing to that, the author, I believe his name is Phil Vincent. Phil Vincent. Yep. He speaks against single-mindedness. It takes focus on multiple areas. The title of his book, Relationship Routines and Rules equals results. So you need all of those things to help move a school forward in building its culture. And if you're focusing on just test scores and leaving everything else to chance, or vice versa, focusing on just character even though that helps settle the students to want to be able to learn, you can't have that single-minded focusedness. You got to look at the totality of what you want as a cultural focus, and how do you get buy-in from all factions of the school community so that we can work together for change.
Thank you. Well, the second part of our title was on challenges, and I know that everybody here like to talk about that. So three of you have implemented some character education program. I think you've all been through the LACES program. What do you see as the largest challenge? If you had to name one or two, what are the biggest challenges that you've faced in implementing character education in your schools?
Teachers.
You could say that louder.
Yeah. It's okay. I'm scared.
I think it's a friendly audience.
I don't know any other way than to be very real. So I would honestly blow up how we train and educate teachers. I feel like there's a mindset and they can't all be Alverno grads, unfortunately, but there's a mindset that I guess I have a theory of not all teachers, but a lot of teachers like school. They probably like the subject that they're teaching, and they don't understand the average to below average student, and why would they possibly not like their class. And so I think that's one issue, is just being able to identify with students and meeting them where they are. And then the other part is like what you mentioned, we don't have time for this. So one of our campuses, our flagship school, is the highest performing of all of our schools, but there's no joy there. And it's like we're churning out little robots. And so that, to me, because I was part of that founding group, and we were a place of happiness and joy and family, and so there's been some transition over time with leadership and things, and we're getting those ACT scores, but we're not developing character, and the teachers don't really see the problem with that. And so I really have a problem with that, because it isn't, you don't have to rewrite your whole unit plan or lesson plan. You just have to, find where this fits in, and just open your mind to it. And so I think that, some of it is leadership, and you have to have that buy-in at the top. But even when you do, there's so much resistance on the ground as well, because there's just such tunnel vision around, I just need them to learn what I'm teaching, and nothing else really matters except for those test scores.
How about some of our other panel members? What do you see as your greatest
Well, I
challenges?
would agree. And as a teacher, when we started working, we started with PBIS, a lot of that. And then character education was brought in because we weren't finding the success just focusing our efforts on PBIS, and character education is what really helped us. And I think that as a teacher going through that, at first you're like, really, just one more thing? Okay, I don't know. And it was saying, and we have the brown deer way. Is that the brown deer way? Here's what the brown deer way is. And you would have teachers and students sarcastically saying, that's not the brown deer way. You have that. But the longer you stick with something, the more serious everybody is about it, and then you see the results. But it is. Adults are resistant. And I think what's really interesting with our program, we're a collaborative team with administrators, teachers, parents, students on our team, and the students are the kids who are writing the character education lessons for the teachers, and there really isn't much a teacher has to do except for log in and see the lesson and carry it out. But even then, when you have new staff come in with staff turnover, there's always going to be a few people that are not fully on board. So I would agree, that is, the adults sometimes are more of a problem.
I think maybe adding to that, not necessarily from the standpoint of rules and routines, but as far as making a connection. There's this need to synthesize home expectations with school expectations. Plus we have this digital divide where students are pretty much babysat by technology, and I don't mean to be demeaning, but I'm speaking the truth. And so we're trying to find a way to synthesize all of those expectations, yet implement education from a trauma-informed era where, we learn to ask not what's wrong with the kids and or families, but what happened to the kids and or families, and how can I implement education from a standpoint of dignity and not further harm those who may have had background experiences that are unfortunate or less fortunate. But, that is a balancing act within and of itself. So when you have a faculty member, for example, who is resistant to looking at other factors of a child's developmental process, that makes it difficult to come to school and sit down and listen to a lesson that is not entertaining, that has no graphics, sounds, and or notifications. What do you expect? So just having them be open to learning other instructional strategies that might be more inclusive, having them, like you say, have the students help write curriculum that would be of more interest to them, and just really figure out it's okay not to know, like I said earlier, as long as you're willing to go out and research what will be best or what would be better and involve the students in their own learning. We have to make sure students take responsibility for their learning. We can't make them do or learn anything. We can only motivate them to want to do that. So I think we do need to work with our adults.
Nancy, you've worked with a lot of schools that have undertaken character education. What do you see as the challenges? Are there some that are kind of universal?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think one is it's character education. It's not a program, and if that's what teachers are looking for, like the program you're going to take off the shelf, that's not what character education is. So it is the mindset that these ladies have been talking about, and with that, then the way that it's happening at Capital West is different than the Brown Deer way, and it's different than what's happening at Carmen, and that's exactly as it should be, because it has to fit the environment, the school, right? So, you know your students best, and Carmen knows who their students are best. And that's why the lessons from Brown Deer that come from the Brown Deer students, that's why that's so successful. It's also so successful because it's been in place for a long time. And that's the other challenge that I think people have with character education. It's like, well, we started it and it didn't work. I did that lesson and it didn't work, so character education doesn't work. Or we did it for a couple of months and we didn't see the increase in test scores and we didn't see a change in behavior with the kids, and therefore the character education doesn't work. And it's 3 to 5 years of implementation before you're really going to notice a significant change. And that's I mean, in the school world, that's a long time. But that's really what it takes, to really kind of get that work embedded. It's hard work, and you have to bring your adults along, and they don't all come along, as you've heard. Kids have to kind of come along, and they don't all come along at the same pace. But you have to figure out what works for your school. What are your school needs? What are your own core values, right? So I mean, if we ask, I'm sure they have similar, but they're not all the same. And then how does character ed fit in with that? So who are your kids? What is your community like? What are your stakeholders think are important? Parents, family, community, all of those kinds of things. So again, character education is not a program. It's not something. It's not a quick fix. It's not something that you can just take on and do. It's work. It's putting a plan together that meets the needs that you've identified as a school. But you have to gather that data first to find out what that is, and then you got to do the work. But then you have to keep at it, and you have to give it that time, 3 to 5 years before you see it.
Well, and it seems to me, there was someone over here talking before about turnover in leadership, whether it's at the district or at the building. And if we know that it's 3 to 5 years to come up with a sustainable change and make something sustainable, and yet you have leadership changes in between there, it would seem to me that would be a challenge as well. Or at least, and maybe not totally obstruct progress, but perhaps impede it at least for a period of time. It also seems to me then that when you have your teachers all on board with that you have more of a likelihood of sustaining that. And then you can weather a change of administration because it's so much a part of your culture.
Yeah.
So.
I think if I can just add,
Yes.
I was in a program this spring around nonprofit leadership, and one of the first things that they taught us was to fail fast. And I was like, nobody's ever said that to me. That's amazing. We were always like, we have to get this right. We have to get this perfect. We're somehow, not good if we make mistakes. Yeah. But then how do you learn? And so I know that that's not just something at Carmen. Like that's something I feel like I've had my whole life. We always had to do, something perfect the first time. But if you don't make mistakes, then how do you learn? And so if we are, as adults, have those expectations on ourselves, and then we're projecting those onto the students as well. And so you never feel like you're succeeding because you actually do need to fail and learn and start over again.
That's a really good point. I think sometimes we do. We stop when we failed. We've assumed that you just can't retrieve it. And yet that's probably the time when you can grow the most. Good point. So now we'll move to something a little more cheerful. And that is, as you look forward to the future, whether it's both for your own organizations, but also just in general, what do you see as some upcoming opportunities in character education? It seems to me that right now, there's a need in society for widespread character education, but for civility, for I worry sometimes about the kinds of models that kids are expected to exposed to when they're watching the news and they're watching the way people talk. And it seems sometimes like in schools we're fighting against the greater society. But what do you see as some opportunities for character ed?
I can start.
Okay.
Because I have the extreme pleasure of being one of the co-directors of LACES and have been for a number of years and have worked with some of these fine individuals here and some in the audience as well. And so I get the pleasure of working with teams from area schools who commit to coming every single month after school or for a whole day to do the hard work that we were just talking about, and to do the individualized work as a team from their school to put a plan in place if they don't have one, or to tweak a plan, add to a plan, whatever it might be, And what they come up with, very individualized as you can imagine, right? There's no like, they all look like this at the end, because that would be a program, and that's not what this is, right? But the work that they do and what they share, we circle, we have meetings every single time too, so we have meeting time. What they share that is happening in their schools and in their individual classrooms, and they do share failures too, right? But what I get to hear from them is I'm always so hopeful at the end of those sessions, and definitely at the end of graduation too, because I'm like, oh, because this is our community, right? And so this is happening in school. So I don't just talk about character in theory. I get to talk about it in practice. And because of that, I get to take it into my classrooms and share it with my students, who are ultimately going to come out and be, working in these schools and be ready to gear up and be partners in these environments. And so when they say to me, this sounds really great, does this really happen? I can say, yeah, actually, in Brown Deer, this is what's going on, and at Carmen, this is what's going on, because I get to, hear it firsthand, and I get to see the process at work too, and it's not easy work, and any of them will tell you that, but it's just it's such a it's an honor actually to be a part of it, because that's the level of commitment that it actually takes to do the work. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen in other schools that aren't part of LACES, but I don't get to see that. So I get to see it as it happens here. And so I just know that it continues each and every year. So that's my opportunity.
I think the word empathy has come up a few times this evening, and I think that is one of the more challenging things that we're trying to do with character education. And one of the things that we're experiencing now is we're trying to get students more out in the community volunteering. And I think that is going to really help them build that and give them those experiences. But I also think we also need to put students more in charge of some of the things that are happening, like we are in our district, where they're planning the events, because I heard a lot of the students here to talk about having students have some kind of say in what they're learning. And I think that they know more than I do what they need and what the world needs. So hopefully that will continue.
I think, so I did another program on community leadership. I've been busy. And one of the first things they had us do was a 4-hour tour of Milwaukee. And I've lived here for almost 30 years. I've lived on every side of the city in several suburbs. We moved quite a bit. And I thought, what are you going to teach me about this city? And I learned so much about the history, about why we're so segregated, how the first Mexicans came, what happened to Bronzeville, some hidden gems in the city. And I thought, all of our teachers, all of our faculty and staff need to do this. Because even if they are from here, which a lot of them are not, they don't know this. And our kids don't know this either. And so, but we have to start with the adults. So we did, we weren't able to do 4-hour bus tours, but we were able to do 2.5-hour bus tours with all of our faculty and staff in August, to start kind of that awareness of where our kids are coming from and what challenges they're facing. And so we didn't want to do just a one and done. So we have like 4 times a year where we have a network PD. So we have one coming up in November. We wanted to do kind of like a scavenger hunt in small groups, but as you probably know, people are always fighting for time for PD. So we didn't have that much time. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring the community to our faculty and staff. And so we're going to be bringing current students, graduates, community, people from community-based organizations, parents, as well as some of our business partners with our internships and apprenticeship programs, to sit in small groups with our faculty and staff and have discussions around things that are facing everyone, so all of our stakeholders, internal and external, to again, like, build that foundation. If you're coming from a middle-class family and you've not ever had to worry about housing or how you're going to eat or violence in your home, as you were saying, the memorials, I mean, that's a reality for our kids, and most of our faculty and staff that's not their experience. And nor will it probably ever be, but if we're not informing them and giving them that opportunity to learn and hopefully igniting that desire in them. And quite honestly, if you don't have that desire, then we're not the right place for you. So I think for our future, we've talked about hiring more for culture fit, and then doing things like this. And so we do have the blessing of leadership to make this a priority. And so along with that, then I see more of this character ed being woven into what we do. But I think you have to start from a place of understanding.
For Capital West Academy, it's much more tangible for us. We are both the state and national school of character, and we are currently applying for our second commendation for National School of Character.
Excellent.
The application is due December 1st. We're on it. So for us, and I think of all the 11 principles of character education that are endorsed by the partnership, number 5 speaks to everything that's just been said, that call to moral action. And within that, we want to grow our kids' understanding of not just the core values that we have and live by in our school community, but we want to expand that into the community at large. We want to take a look at some restorative practices in helping train the students to help moderate and mitigate their own challenges and come to an agreement. We want to see definitely much less suspending. Kids need to be in school. They don't gain anything from being at home, but they do also need to have an understanding of how their actions may hurt or harm, and what are some alternatives to action that can be more beneficial and uplifting. We're very much focusing on bucket filling at the school. So looking at the service learning piece that I heard spoken of, we want to really wrap those priorities in this application and really just grow our kids' understanding and acceptance of themselves as well as each other, so we can, move our academics as well as our character forward.
Wonderful. So what I'm hearing is there are some myths. And they're out there, but I also hear that people are taking action to dispel those myths, that there are challenges and that there will always be challenges, but even within those challenges, there are opportunities, and you're finding those opportunities. So now the people in the room have a little opportunity to interact with the people on the panel. Are there questions or comments that you would like to ask them? And I know there's got to be at least someone. Oh, there's a hand already. Yay. Okay.
I've been retired from MPS for about 5 years. And at that point, PBIS was a major component of the everyday life. And I could walk into a classroom and identify by the numerical rankings, and the reward, punishment. I mean, obviously a very behavioralistic approach. This is not what I'm hearing up here. And I guess what I'm wondering is, how intentional is your, I don't hate to use the word programming, but the systematic, everyday, this is how we do business in our school, as opposed to maybe this is what my family does, this is what we do on the street, but how intentional is that, and specific? This is what we do at Brown Deer, or this is what we do at Carmen. And do kids have difficulty with that? Are they able to make that leap from going from the home culture, which may have chaos, children not sleeping at night because they're taking care of their siblings, all of that, to one where this is where we care about each other?
Well, if you don't mind if I start. One of the hinge plates for us at Capital West Academy is mindfulness, which is the purposeful intention on paying attention to oneself. So self-regulation is the key to making character work. We talk about neurodevelopment and how students go into this fight or flight mode. It's no need in talking to an angry kid, because that, whole idea of flipping your lid or the prefrontal cortex blowing, they're not going to be rational. you're wasting time, you're wasting energy, you're wasting breath. So one of the things that we purposefully and intentionally teach our children is the practice of mindfulness. We have both our guidance counselor and our school-based therapist actually go and do, we call booster lessons. Every, I want to say maybe 2 to 3 years, we implement the full range of techniques. There are about 13. And then every year in between, we do booster classes to help make sure the new students have exposure. And I've seen it work. I mean, if a student engages in a physical altercation and we get them separated, we have restored safety, physical safety. Before we can engage in any conversation, I would ask the student, well, what's your favorite mindfulness technique? The one that I like and is easy for them to remember is the Take 5, where we trace our finger and do the deep breathing. By the time we're finished with that, I give them maybe a couple more minutes, and then we can start to dig in. They're still not ready to have a mediation, but at least we can gain a better understanding of what set them off to begin with. And by the time they're calm and able to at least talk about it, they can name at least 3 other things they could have done instead of the action they chose. And while it might seem to be a bit of an up and down, I've had parents who've come in, like during reinstatement meetings and things like that, who say the children are teaching them the mindfulness techniques that they're learning in class. So we know it's helpful. It's not a one and done by any means, but that's what we do. And every classroom is expected to have a mindfulness activity every single day for at least 5 minutes. And coupled with that, daily character education lessons. And then monthly, we have what we call prides, where we mix the older kids with the younger kids, and then they have a lesson that they plan together, where they're teaching and practicing those character traits. So it is definitely a regiment. Some days work better than others, as I'm sure in all places, but it is that focused, intentional teaching of those traits so that they can use them when they need them the most.
One thing that we are piloting this year is out of Valor Collegiate, and so there's circle protocols and badge work, and it's very, very scripted, and so that's really around building relationships and getting to know the students and building trust. But I also think, and so that's, I think, a step in the right direction, but I still feel like sometimes I'm an Alverno grad, so I think about like problem solving and actually identifying the problem. And so the problem still is the adults. And so when you're thinking, when we're having a culture team meeting and our deans are focusing only on discipline is not culture. That's not the root of the problem. So I was recently at one, and it was kind of a similar thing. They were doing some role playing about, if there's an altercation and what do you do, and so a practice that we had years ago when we first opened was the student had to sit down and write what happened. And I said, are you guys doing that? And well, no. And so I thought, well, why are we going backwards? And so again, like, if first of all, they're writing it down, so you're calming yourself, right? And then I said, why don't we have a universal form where you're doing that, where you're saying, what would you change if you went through this again? In the future, what will you do differently? And then, like, I had a goal. I think a goal for the future. And so I was like, you have documentation right there, and you didn't have to write it, and they're calming themselves down. Also, if when you're doing a mediation, you have then their documentation. So if they go back on something they said or whatever, like this is your words, you wrote this down. And then moving forward and looking into the future is how can they change their behavior. So I think we, again, have to shift that mindset of the adults of, culture is not discipline. It's just really not. And so until we get past that, I feel like we still have some hurdles in our way.
Right, well, kind of going into LACES, starting with the touchstone, that was part of the very first cohort of people from Brown Deer, and they wrote it. I won't read the whole thing off to you, but we're saying we are confident, accepting, respectful, responsible, trustworthy. I think that's all. But that's there, and staff wrote it. And so the staff that were really invested and wanted to see that change were here, and they wrote that. And that's something that when you come to our school, you see it posted all over the building, and we can say this. And at the end, it says, "This is who we are at Brown Deer Middle High School, even when no one's watching." And those posters are now all over the community, and we've seen a change in the community, and we've seen a change when the kids are out. And we actually won an award at the WIAA basketball tournament for sportsmanship, and they thought that our students were wonderful, showed wonderful sportsmanship, and that's just who we are. And it took a long time, though. I mean, we've been saying it's 3 to 5 years. It takes a while, and you really have to stick with it. But having the staff be a part of writing that and just keep sharing it with the students daily and making it a part of what we do every Monday.
Other questions?
It sounds, I just wanted to make a comment and then a question. What you're describing, all four of you, it sounds really encouraging. I was one that's, sure, no problem. Hi, I just wanted to say that that the entire panel is addressing some really, really pertinent issues here with regards to character education. I am curious to know how close would would a university like Alverno, in terms of their teacher education department, how close aligned is the, pitching or appealing to this idea of character education? How close in alignment are you with really making a major impact in the school communities?
Are you
That's
speaking
a
about with
question.
our students?
Well, I'm with regards to the new teacher program, how much emphasis or how important is that within the new teacher program, and how well is it aligned to really making some major impacts? Understandably, it takes 3 to 5 years to see it roll out, in its truest form, but I'm just curious as to how much emphasis and how important, how significant are you?
I'm gonna ask Nancy to speak to that a little bit as she works with most of our undergrads. I think the thing that's missing at the undergraduate level, and quite frankly, I'm not sure how to make it there, is the context of working in a school that is doing the program, because so much of what happens is you're doing it in community with the rest of the faculty. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean it's ignored. So you might want to speak to that.
So a couple of my students are here.
Yes.
And I'm teaching the first field class with them, and we've talked about it probably every class since Raina's with me, since day one, probably in some fashion, and have kind of built on it every single class. Okay, likely it's because I'm teaching it, but I won't even say that, and I won't even say it's because I'm co-directing LACES either. I think our faculty across the board, we've always been about relationships first, and that's just always been who we are. We've always been the belief that you can't, as these ladies have said too, you can't teach them if you don't know them. And so that's always been our thing. We maybe not have called it character ed when we were doing it, and now I'm giving it more of a name so that they're more familiar with it. But we've kind of long done that, so I haven't really changed too much. I've given them more of the strategies probably since I've been involved. So we've been talking about morning meetings and circles and restorative, practices and things like that, that we'll sort of build on as we move forward. And again, my hope is that they will then, when they're looking for their jobs, they'll be looking in environments that offer that, or that they will bring that with them in the environments that they end up in. And so it's not just me, for sure, I can tell you that.
Well, I was going to say the other thing that we've done is last year we, particularly the people working in the undergraduate program, undertook a pretty major redesign of our undergraduate program that is just now beginning to start filtering through. And one of the things that the faculty did was to identify specifically how we're addressing culture across all 4 years of the program. And starting with understanding your own culture to be able to then understand the culture of the community in which you're working. And so we've infused some of these things now across the whole 4 years in additional depth and from different perspectives throughout the program. So we're just now getting next year to the group of students who will be in beginning to see how that's falling out, and that's increased with field work in the schools as well. So the other thing that we've done is Nancy was talking about teaching that first field class. Well, in that first field class, those students are in schools 8 hours a week, and they're in the same school, and Nancy teaches the seminar in the school, so that they're really embedded in a school from the beginning. And so they're spending more time in schools, and that increases every year till their senior year now. Next year, we'll have a group of seniors who will be spending 3 full days in their first semester and 5 full days in their second semester. So they'll have a lot of school. They'll be able to experience the culture and the activities within the school for an entire year.
That's wonderful to hear. Looking forward to seeing more of our thought leaders in character education identified from Alverno.
Thank you. Other questions? I know we're getting really close to the end of time, and we have some resources we want to share with you.
Yeah.
So maybe there's time for one more wrap-up question? Or maybe by absence of that, people are saying it's time.
Okay.
But I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank the members of our panel. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. I'd also like to do a shout out because when I was teaching, I only taught graduate students except for one class that I taught to undergrads once, and then one of you was here, maybe two. But I have to tell you, I'm just really impressed with our students. It's very clear that you are thinkers and you ask good questions and you express yourself really well, and the more I hear Alverno students, the more impressed I am by you. So thank you for taking your time to come and for participating so actively among a group of professional people.
And certainly last but not least, one of the things we promised is to be able to share resources with you as well as the strategies you heard. So these were my best resources that we shared with you, for sure. So yes, another round of applause for our famous panelists. So thank you very much for agreeing to be a part of this tonight. But we also, if you look on the screens that we've got, you see, I'm losing my mind at this point. You see a link that we have on the bottom. It's a bit.ly. And if you write that link down, and once you have a chance, if you click on that, you will be directed to a page that's going to give you a lot of different resources for character education, including things you heard about tonight, like mindfulness, like 11 principles, social emotional learning, equity, social justice, all of those kinds of good things. And just so you know, once you start, it's kind of like a rabbit hole. So once you click on one link, there's going to be more links that you can get to. So I'm just warning you ahead of time. But that link there will give you a lot more resources, videos, articles. And then Julie has just passed around a sheet that has the 11 principles on it. That's the framework that the National Character Education Partnership uses, the state uses. It's what Mora was referring to when she was saying, oh, Principle 5 on moral action. So all of these ladies know exactly what that is. And so now you have that in front of you as well. Again, not a program, but principles that are used to think through what it means and what it looks like. So those are the resources that we're sharing with you. My last comment is in your booklets that you got on your way in. There is an evaluation. We are Alverno. We thrive on feedback. It's how we learn. It's how we grow. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out and handing that out. Oh, and do not let me forget. Please take this with you. We are, if you loved what you saw today, we have a character education conference here in June. It is, the 19th is pre-conference stuff, but the full day conference is June 20th. It's great stuff. I highly encourage you to take this with you. Join us if you can. It's amazing. We bring in national, you know the national conference I told you I was at? We rival that. I'm not kidding you. We bring in national speakers, great breakout sessions. It's just absolutely amazing. I'd love to see you there. So take this with you and come if you can. Am I missing anything, Josie? No? I got it? I got everything? All right. Thank you again for coming. Really appreciate it. Have a great night. Go Brewers!
Oh, that's right.